Animation. It's fun. You like animation, Ace?
Huh?
You,
So animation.
don't you act like... Animation, yes. We're talking about animation. It's an animation tutorial. This is going to be one of our first animation tutorials focusing on Clip Studio Paint. Well, I don't know if it's our first anymore, but it is one of the ones that's going to be a little program specific, but it is talking about something that Clip Studio Paint does. It doesn't do as well as some programs, but it's still a tool that I love to utilize. If you watch Storytime animators or shows like Rick and Morty or really almost any show or media since the invention of digital animation, you're going to notice stuff that looks just super duper whooper looper loopity oopity consistently drawn stuff. Now, if we're talking about things like Snow White, that's just because they were insane and drew stuff very carefully, I guess, but most of us cannot draw the exact same circle by hand twice without any jittering, which is where computer animation started doing digital puppet rigs and focus less on drawing individual frames and more on moving layers on layers that build up to look like a character. And Clip Studio, which Ace and I would argue is the most professional, I got that backwards, the most affordable professional level software that you can get your hands on, and it can do this. Now, disclaimer, it does not do this greatly. If like Rick and Morty, things like that have very, I would call them utilitarian rigs, and they can be reused all the time to make walk cycles and make the characters jump, do all sorts of things. And you can do that. If I make a head folder, I can switch frames to give the same illusion of turning. But what makes After Effects, Toon Boom, things like that work better is not so much that they can switch those drawings, but the amount of controls that they can apply. That is a limitation to consider. So if you're looking, when we're thinking about this, think about doing this rigging, quote unquote, in Clip Studio, more like a paper puppet than a digital animation rig. Does that kind of make sense, or have I lost anyone?
That makes sense.
All the kiddies in the back still awake?
Yes, teacher.
Never do that again. So, this is great for relatively simple motion graphic style stuff. Or, what I really like to do with it is not this. I like to use it for cutaway shots almost. Things that, if I'm doing a frame by frame animation that takes all that dynamic movement and then cut to something of kind of slow-mo where I need that consistency. So that's really what this is going to come down to is, what is your priority? Now, the process to making this. It's an animation, it's art. The first thing you're going to want to do, like just about anything, is going to be sketch. Think about this step by step. So I think I make my best illustrations when I'm thinking about a short film, a moment of that story, telling it. So, and maybe before this is out, I'll kind of get a quick sketchy version of all this up. But this is also kind of a humble kind of ad bullshit. We are making a comic book that is going to be a kind of Monster Hunter's journal. And we're collaborating with some of our friends like Raft Dudes, who we have done collaborations with, Odd Egg, Phantom Quill, people that we know from college. Great artists. You're about to see some of the best dragons you have ever seen. So it's going to be this kind of like pseudo field journal bestiary kind of thing. And this is a monster that, admittedly, is not in the book. I doodled this idea. I love the idea of a spider wolf. It's like my version of an Avatar Last Airbender animal hybrid, but we took the page out. So this is me still having a spider wolf. So the idea I have is basically just a short of this little guard kind of wandering around with a little lantern going doo, 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 and just stuff darting around behind them. It's like whoo, huh? Big close up on the scary face, a couple close up shots, which also can be very easily rigged. This is again what I'm talking about. This would be more about the consistency, but you might want to add little bits of movement. So you can do things like have the nose on a different layer and jiggle it, have the teeth jitter, stuff like that. And then go to our little flash cut and have this dynamic shot with the critter kind of lunging towards camera. So then you pick your shot, what you want to do. get your rough thumbnail sketch set up. And then on top of it, this is kind of what you're going to see in some professional studio kind of nonsense. What all these colors are, aside from looking like a kindergartner threw up their crayon lunch, is just kind of trying to symbolize how many layers I'm thinking of. And maybe you can do this without all the different colors, but it helps because the premise of this is going to be anything that moves will need to be its own layer, which is going to build up some processing power. Consider how good your computer is. Even my computer, which is relatively good, not top of the line, but relatively good, if I make like some kind of 100-layer thing, I think it'll crash. I think it'll die.
Yeah.
And again, some other programs process this a little better. Toon Boom, I was able to make layers upon layers for days. But again, this is about kind of getting to the core of your idea. So if you want to have like the top fur shake like we have here, up here, you would want that to be its own layer. If you want the mouth to move independently, that's going to need to be its own layer. And kind of plan out generally what that movement is. So I want a wolf lunging towards camera. Think about how you want your legs to move to kind of promote that idea, any secondary motion. Like if I was really going nuts, I would take the ears and make them their own layer so I can do like a little wiggle waggle. But yeah, that's going to be figuring this out is kind of the biggest part. After this, life's going to get really easy. Or not easy, but
Easier.
you're going to use less brain power, I think. Putting it together, and we have time-lapse footage of this, but again, if we're making a whole character, and in the past, I used to just make all my layers and compile it and organize them after the fact. There's nothing wrong with that, except what's wrong with it is that you will get confused. It's taking a step after the fact that you could be doing as you go along. So you can see this is all one character, and this is the core how this works. You have groups that can move everything. That's really what does this. And you then make subgroups. So you're going to have your master file, or what I call it, so character, master. And then oftentimes the next thing I break up is upper and lower bodies. So now I can move everything that I consider the chest or upper area separately. And when I break that down, we have the different spider leg controllers. So I can move this leg, which will move all the necessary joints. And then within that, I have spider leg 2-2 master. Not 2-2, 1-2. And from there, I can move the lower two layers. And from there, I can open that up. And finally, I have 1-3, which lets me move just the very tip of it.
That is a whole lot.
But again, the core of it is just that you need to think about what moves what. So if I go to the paw, so my leg, one layer. So it controls, this again, controls 3 layers, which is going to be kind of a good idea. Think about your limbs. The majority of your limbs are your bicep, your forearm, your hand, thigh, calf, foot. And you can break it down even further into like fingers and everything, but really if you're going to be moving your hands a lot, I would just have multiple frames that you can switch between of open hand, closed hand, like lip syncing.
Okay.
You can't, there are rigs out there that can like have a mouth controller and deform it all, but I think it's much easier just to have your different things drawn.
Gotcha.
So with this, you can really quickly make it look like your arm is swiping, or your leg, because it's a wolf, by just moving the whole thing over. And think about depth too. Think about overlap. That's going to be something that makes this look less cheap, in my opinion. That's why a lot of my stuff, I don't do flat, like again, a master rig that you're going to reuse over and over in a TV show is going to start from like a normal standing or T-pose position. Mm-hmm. But for something like this where you can't get that dimensionality as much, it's easier to make it kind of already dynamic and just have the different parts overlap, and you can control other things like the scaling of everything, stuff like that. And think about what follows what, you know. If you can have So if I go up here and open up my animation guide that I drew, then you're going to see the arrows I drew, and not all the arrows are going the same way. If your character is going in this direction, then you want some assets going this way and then bouncing back in, thinking about your principles of animation. They always come in handy. The other biggest thing that I can talk about, now again, this is very illustrative. I can do a lot more detail than I normally would, and so take advantage of that. Do some really cool rendering on it. But one of the big things to try to keep in mind that's going to also make this a good technique that supports you and not shooting yourself in the foot. If I take this spider leg and I move it out of the way, look at the amount of overlap we have. It doesn't just cut off where that layer is. Because if I want to move this at all, there's no way that you're going to have things so perfectly lined up. So you want to just kind of imagine, what don't you see under your hand? And make sure that you have the room there, that you're not making it a constraint for yourself in the workflow. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Another little trick to help kind of make things feel cohesive. So on your master layer, I like to add a final stroke to kind of make it all feel cohesive, which it doesn't do very much, but it can help hide a few of those awkward gaps. And it just, like I said, you're working to make as much illusion as possible to make these multiple different layers feel like one thing. And so I think that having that kind of helps. Another little tip that you want to do or consider in Clip Studio Paint is that, and this is going to be where my computer starts to chug a little bit.
Chug, chug.
Chug, chug, chug. Like, yeah, you can see it's already taking them this long to turn a layer on. But one thing I want to go over very quickly. So this up here, this little box is going to be what you actually use in your animation. So you have whatever folder you need selected. And if you have your master turned on to keyframe, everything will keyframe. Down here, enable keyframes on this layer. Have that on or off. That will dictate whether you can start doing your keyframe animation. And make sure the first thing you need to do, the first keyframe you set, you want to move this little, you might want to zoom in, this little cross cursor here. That is going to be, you need that so that it knows where to pivot your character. Without that, because if I move the spider leg and the pivot point's just in the middle of the leg, that's not how it works. It needs to move where it connects to the body, right?
Right.
Cool. Yeah. One other quick tip, because again, and this is going to be very nitpicky technical, what I would recommend doing is animate your big motions first. So the first thing I did was move the master. Where is he from point A to point B? And after that, I turn off the keyframes on the master layer. And I will actually animate each limb individually without the rest of the keyframes turned on. It just makes your computer process less at a time. And what you can do to try to, because obviously you want to keep track of the motion. If you're trying to make a character jump, you don't want to move the legs after the whole body moves up. So what you want to do is go up to animation, up in the top window. I don't think it's capturing on here, but Ace can go in and screen grab it later because I give her work. So animation, timeline, label. It's above timeline. Create timeline label. And when you click that, it will pop up with an option to determine what you want to call it. So that's why if you look at my timeline, you have ease in, extreme ease out, master keyframe. So that way I don't have to have the master layer on and see it moving back and forth. I can just turn on what I'm animating at a time and turn them all back on at the end.
Gotcha.
Any big questions there?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I will leave you with some cool animations. Like I said, there's a couple examples that I'm hoping Ace remembers to show.
I'll remember.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And maybe get some cool B-roll in there because there's a lot of cool things to look at. If you have specific questions, feel free. If you want how I would break down different close-up shots, because again, you can really have a lot of fun if you make kind of like a rigged mouth and have that kind of like stepped animation look, as it's like "Arr!" Crying. Facial rigs are a lot of fun. But use it. This Clip Studio Paint really does give you a lot of cool stuff that is it's not quite up there. Like I can't do as much as I can with After Effects or Toon Boom, but I can do everything that I personally need to in my personal projects. So
Woohoo.
yeah, hope you had fun. Comment questions that you have, and until then, brush your teeth.
Bye.
Bye.